Imagine for a moment that you place your hand over your heart and realize that what has made you heavy is not the events that happened, but the way you carried them. I have met many souls walking through life with an invisible suitcase filled with things they believed could never change, yet one day, in the quiet of their own mind, a small beam of light opens. They are no longer bound by how others spoke about their past, and no longer loyal to the old stories they once repeated to themselves. Instead, they begin to move with a different flow, a gentle yet steady current carrying clarity, compassion, and a peace they had forgotten they possessed. In a world where people are easily pulled under by memories, there is still a timeless truth waiting to be seen, the truth that the past is not a prison, but a mirror reflecting what we once believed, and if belief can change, then the mirror can change too. Between the wide sky above and the deep places of human awareness, there is always a bridge not made of stone, but of light, of ancient understanding, of the wisdom that has lived within every soul since the beginning. This bridge does not require you to be perfect to step onto it. It asks only one thing: your willingness. When you step onto the bridge of light, you do not bring the luggage of yesterday, you bring only your presence. And the moment you take that first step, you hear a whisper rising from deep within, words that do not come to inform you, but to transform you. They tell you that you are not marked by your past, not locked inside your old story, not meant to live in the shadow of what has been. You are invited to look again with new eyes, the eyes that God placed within you from the beginning. And when you begin to see with those eyes, something strange happens. What once made you tremble becomes light. What once felt impossible begins to open into new paths, not because the past changes, but because the place from which you see it changes. Let this opening touch you as a reminder. There is a truth waiting for you to recognize, a truth about freedom, a truth about stillness, a truth about yourself, and that journey begins right now. When I began my journey many years ago, I believed that human awareness and divine awareness were two separate streams, like two rivers running side by side that would never meet. One was the noise of life, filled with worry, calculation, regret, and the scattered notes of memory. The other whispered with peace, with certainty, with a light untouched by any event in the world. But the deeper I went, the more I realized they were never separate. The separation itself was the greatest illusion we humans believe. Your awareness is never alone. It is always supported by a deeper layer of wisdom, something I have always called divine intelligence. It does not knock loudly. It does not force its way in. It only waits for you to remember that you once belonged to it long ago. And when this connection opens, your life changes in a way you do not need to strain to control. I have met many people who carry what they call the burden of the past. When they speak, I see their shoulders drop, as if they are trying to carry the whole world, yet divine intelligence never looks at you that way. In the higher layer of awareness, there are no files kept against you, no record of the mistakes you repeated, no courtroom created to judge the choices of your youth. Divine intelligence does not work through memory, but through essence. It does not see you through what you have done, but through the light you were created from. For this reason, when human awareness reconnects with divine awareness, the past loses its power. It is no longer a chain of days shaping the future, but only a thin veil that can be moved aside to reveal a deeper way of living. I remember one time during a small gathering in Boston, an older man came to me after the talk. He said, "Emmet, I have prayed for decades to be free from the things I did when I was young. I feel as if I have a voice inside me that never stops speaking. It tells me I must pay for what I did for the rest of my life. He had lived like that for 30 years, believing the past was standing behind him, pushing him down, but when I looked into his eyes, I did not see guilt. I saw a man who had forgotten that his mind held a door to truth, a door that had never been closed. I told him that if the past could bind him, then it would need to have power of its own, but it does not. The only power the past has is the power he gave it by believing in it. If he withdrew that belief, it could no longer stand. When he looked at me in surprise, I continued, "There is no force in the universe holding you in yesterday. You have simply not stepped into today with your awareness. And to step into today, you do not need to forget, and you do not need to blame yourself. You only need to remember that your awareness and divine intelligence were never apart. When you allow yourself to merge with it, what you call guilt is no longer a sentence but becomes a lesson." He stood in silence for a long time and then whispered that for the first time in many years, he felt a small opening of light inside him. That opening was the sign that the connection had returned. There is something I want you to understand clearly. When human awareness is not connected to the divine, the mind becomes tired because it tries to explain everything by itself. It tries to reason, compare, analyze, defend, blame, and then blame itself. But when awareness moves in harmony with divine intelligence, it no longer needs to do any of that. Instead of asking why something happened, it begins to see the larger picture. Instead of focusing on mistakes, it focuses on growth. Instead of asking what it deserves, it asks who it can become, and that question frees it. The union between these two layers of awareness does not come from ritual or effort, but from a softening inside you, a moment when you breathe gently and say, "I am ready to see with clear eyes. I am ready to release the old way of looking. I am ready to let divine intelligence move in me." When you say those words, no one hears them, but truth hears them, and truth answers with something subtle. Your heart widens a little. When you look at memory, you no longer tremble. When you look at the future, you are no longer afraid. You do not become someone else. You return to who you have always been. And when this connection returns, you understand something I once did not understand. The past does not need to be fixed. It only needs to be seen with a mature awareness. When you see it rightly, it dissolves, and when it dissolves, you are free. Before closing this part, I want to ask you a gentle question. Is there a moment in your life, even a small one, when you felt you were not alone in your pain, as if an unseen hand was holding you steady? Are you willing to remember that moment? Thank you for being here and walking with me on this journey. When I was much younger, I used to believe that the past clung to people because of the events it carried. I thought the weight was in what had happened, in the real wounds and the poor decisions or the unspoken losses. Yet the deeper I went into the inner life, the more I realized the truth lived somewhere completely different. The past does not chase us. We chase it by carrying the mistaken meanings we once placed on each moment that has passed. I began to see that it is not memory that hurts a person. It is the interpretation of memory that makes the soul heavy, and that changed the way I saw life. Many long afternoons I listened to tired hearts tell the stories of their yesterday. Strangely, what they told me was not the event itself. What they shared was how they had looked at that event from then until now. They carried someone's blame, the voice of their 15-year-old self, the fear they never admitted, and they believed all of that was an unchangeable truth. But memory does not come to bind you. It comes once and leaves once. What repeats 1,000 times is the way you keep holding it in your mind with the mistaken belief that it still has power over your life today. Human awareness has a strange habit. It wants to understand everything through a timeline. It labels certain points and calls them its identity, but time is not a river you must float along. Time is a veil you weave with belief. When your belief says, "The past is still here," you instantly live as if yesterday is standing right in front of you. When you believe that what happened has carved itself into your spirit, you begin to see yourself as someone marked by events you can never touch again. But when you see the true nature of time, the whole structure falls apart. I once told a young woman that time has no claws. It does not come back to scratch you. If today you still feel something from 20 years ago as if it just happened, it is not time doing that. It is your mind keeping the memory alive by repeating the emotion attached to it. Pain cannot exist on its own. It has to be fed by attention to keep functioning inside you, and the comforting thing is that you have the right to withdraw that attention whenever you choose. Sometimes my heart grows quiet when I see someone believe they are defined by one single moment, as if a vast life has been reduced to a story told long ago. I want to place my hand on their shoulder and tell them that they are not bound by that event. They are bound by the meaning they gave it a meaning, born from fear, from immaturity, from the limited light of a young mind. Yet today they are no longer the person they were then, and because of that they have the right to look back with different eyes. The interesting thing is that memory is soft. It is not hard as we think. It is not an unchanging stone. It is like water waiting to take the shape of the awareness holding it. A painful memory can become light if you look at it with maturity. A memory that once brought shame can turn into a gentle reminder if you look at it with compassion for yourself. And a memory that once broke you can become the proof that you stood up again, but this only happens when you stop treating the past as a sentence. Many people ask me why they cannot escape an old image, even when they understand all the theories about healing, and I always answer the same way. Because you are not trapped in the memory. You are trapped in the belief that the memory is absolute truth. You do not give yourself a chance to look again. You do not open the door for truth to enter. You keep believing that what you thought yesterday is fixed, and that belief is the lock keeping you there, but truth is always gentler than your recollection. When you let truth shine on memory, it does not disappear, but it changes color. It no longer makes you choke. It becomes something you can see without trembling. Remember that the past has no intention to hurt you. It has no memory of its own. It has no awareness of its own. It is only a moment that has passed, and like every moment, it only continues to live if your mind invites it to stay. When you stop telling the old story in the old way, it has nothing left to hold on to. When you stop believing that your old interpretation is the only truth, memory begins to move. It makes room for new meaning. It becomes part of a journey rather than the center of who you are. I want you to understand that you do not have a problem with the past. You only have a problem with the way you believe in it, and that is the one thing you have the power to change. When you accept that time does not bind you, that memory has no independent force, that meaning can be rewritten, you will see that no ghost is chasing you, only old thoughts waiting to be replaced by light. And from the moment you realize this, the past no longer stands behind you. It returns to where it belongs, a chapter already written, so you can hold the pen and write the next one with a wider heart and a more mature awareness. You will feel a strange peace when you understand that the past is only strong when you give it power, and weakens when you take that power back, and the day you take it back, you step into a new life not with the noise of effort, but with the stillness of someone who has understood the truth. When I was a young man just beginning my spiritual journey, I carried a quiet belief that God looked at me the same way I looked at myself. I thought that if I failed, he must be disappointed. If I made mistakes, he must pull away. If I did something unworthy, he must be writing it down in some invisible book. I lived many years with that belief, a belief that made the human soul smaller than its true nature, yet through experiences, through quiet prayers, through moments of stillness so deep that I could no longer tell where my breath ended and where the divine presence began, I found a truth that changed the entire foundation of my thinking. God has never seen humans the way they see themselves. He does not use time to judge. He does not use events to define. He does not use memory to measure essence. He knows one thing about you, that you were created from goodness, and you cannot lose that nature no matter what you have walked through. When I began to understand this truth, everything in me opened. I realized that people suffer not because they make mistakes, but because they believe their mistakes become their identity. A person fails once and calls themselves a failure. A person loves wrong once and calls themselves unworthy. A person says something they should not have said and calls themselves destructive. Those labels do not come from God. They come from the human mind, from moments when the heart could not yet see the light. But the light never left them. They only turned away from it for a while. I have sat beside many people who cried because they believed they had lost their worth forever, and each time I placed my hand on the table and said gently that your worth is not something you can lose. Your worth is not built on anything you have done. Your worth begins where you were formed in the mind of the Creator. He does not create temporary beings. He does not create a soul and then wait to see if it can stay good. He creates an eternal essence, bright and whole, and that is what he always sees, even when you cannot see it. I remember a woman once asked me during a talk in New York whether it was possible that God saw all the terrible things she had done, and therefore judged her as a broken soul. When she asked, her voice shook like someone standing before a final sentence. I looked at her for a long moment and said, God does not see you through your story. He sees you through your essence. The story can change 100 times in a lifetime. The essence does not, and the only thing he holds is that essence. When I said that, she cried, but this time not with the tears of guilt, but with the tears of someone finally released from a rope that had tightened around her heart for too long. I want you to hear this in the quiet of your own being. You are not your past. You are not your unwise choices. You are not the emotions that once knocked you down. You are not your regrets. Those things are only the shadows of a life in which your inner light has always been greater. Your essence does not leave you because you wandered. It remains waiting for you to remember it. Many people believe they must reach a certain level of perfection to deserve peace. They think that when they fix all they have done wrong, they will earn their place in the light. But peace does not come that way. Peace comes when you realize you never left the light. You only walked into stories that kept you from seeing it. When you pause, breathe softly, and remember that you were created from light, you instantly feel the calm you thought you had lost long ago. Essence is not something you must search for. It is something you must remember. I once compared the human essence to a clear mirror. The events of life are like layers of dust. If you think the dust is the mirror itself, you will despair, but if you know the dust is only something resting on the surface while the mirror remains bright underneath, you will no longer fear what has happened. You simply wipe away the dust of misunderstanding and the light appears unchanged. What I want you to know is this: God never sees you through the dust. He does not see you through the broken pieces of your story. He sees you through the original light He placed in you, and when you learn to see yourself the way He sees you, you step into a different life. You stop judging yourself. You stop shrinking yourself. You stop believing you are the product of yesterday. You see yourself as someone new, not because you have just changed, but because you have recognized the truth that has always been there. I say this in the silence of my heart: you have never left your true essence. No matter how far your thoughts wander, your soul remains at the center, unharmed, unbroken, full of light. And if today that feels dim, it is not because it is absent. It is only because you are standing on the shadowed side of yourself. Turn slightly, and the light will touch you again. There is something it took me many years to understand, and when I finally understood it, I found it so simple that it felt almost strange. The past does not need to be fixed. It does not need to be taken apart 1,000 times. It does not need to be analyzed from every angle. The only thing it needs is a decision in your awareness, a small decision that is stronger than any effort you have ever tried, the decision that you will no longer hold the past as the absolute truth of your life. Looking back on my own journey, I realized that the day I changed was not the day I understood everything that had happened. It was the day I stopped letting old memories speak for me. I let go, not through strength, but through the understanding that what I hold in my mind lives, and what I release fades. Once I sat by a window watching a dry leaf fall from a branch. It fell so lightly. If I had not paid attention, I would have thought it vanished. In that moment, something rose inside me, something I later understood as the voice of truth. If you release a memory the way a leaf releases the branch, it no longer falls into you. It falls away from you. From that day, I began observing my awareness differently. I realized that memories do not return to hurt me on their own. I call them back by repeating them, by clinging to them, by using them to explain who I am. And each time I do that, I feed the old image and make it stronger in the present. What traps a person is not the past, but the unconscious repetition of the mind when it believes memory is identity. If you look at a painful moment as the end of your story, it becomes the end. If you look at it as a thin beam of light leading you toward growth, it becomes that light. The meaning you give the past determines the shape it keeps inside you, and that meaning always belongs to you. Many years ago in Chicago, I met an older man who told me that the deepest regret of his life was the day he was not by his wife's side at the moment she needed him most. He lived almost 3 decades under the shadow of that decision. When I asked him whether he repeated that memory every day, he nodded, and I told him that it was the repetition that was hurting him, not the event itself. When he released the meaning, "This was the greatest mistake of my life," and replaced it with "This was a moment when I was not clear, and I have learned," his whole body changed. Weeks later, he wrote to me saying that for the first time in many years, he felt his soul as light as a room with its windows opened after a long winter. The human mind moves by a simple but uncompromising law. What is held by emotion remains. What is released by awareness dissolves. If you look at the past with condemnation, it grows inside you through darkness. If you look at it with clarity, it returns to its real size, just an event that once happened, nothing more and nothing less. When you say in your heart, "I no longer believe this memory defines me," you cut the only string the past still holds. Releasing a memory is not forgetting it. Releasing is returning it to its place. Releasing is stopping the habit of using it to describe yourself. Releasing is understanding that you are standing in today's light, not yesterday's shadow. One evening, as I walked through a park, I saw a young man trying to untangle a kite string caught in a branch. The more he pulled, the tighter the knot became, but when he softened his hands and loosened each part gently, the string opened by itself. I stood there and felt that it was the perfect metaphor for the past. The more you pull, the more it hurts. The more gently you look at it, the more it opens. You do not need to defeat the past. You only need to stop fighting it. When you fight, you are telling yourself it is stronger than you. But when you look at it with understanding, you are telling yourself that you are stronger than the story. And when your awareness stands up, every memory must bow down. Someone once asked me whether there is a right time to release the past. I answered that the only time needed is the moment you say enough. Not when you understand everything, not when life becomes easy, not when you find a conclusion. Only when you truly decide that you will no longer live in the old room. That decision is light but large, and it opens the door to peace. If today you feel a memory still holding, you know that the imprisonment exists only in thought, not in your soul. No prison surrounds you, only walls made of old beliefs, and with one decision, those walls can fall in complete silence. Before closing this part, if you are listening and feel ready to set something down, let me invite you to do this small thing. Comment, "I am ready to change," or simply the number 1, so I know you are walking with me on this journey of opening your inner life. Thank you for the honest presence you bring. There was something I did not understand for many years, and when I finally understood it, I saw that it was far simpler than I ever imagined. Emotions do not speak about the present as much as people think. Most of the time they reflect something else, something older, deeper, unresolved, something that has not yet been seen clearly. I spent many years listening to people talk about sudden bursts of anger, long stretches of sadness and anxieties, with no clear source, and each time I noticed the same thing. It was not the present causing those reactions. It was the past, still unilluminated, sending an echo back into their lives. Emotion is an echo, and an echo only exists when there is a surface for it to bounce against. Sometimes I meet people who say they do not understand why they react so strongly to small things. A careless comment hurts them for weeks. A single glance makes them collapse inside. A minor delay creates a large wave of panic. And when they look at themselves, they see that their reactions are far bigger than the situation. But the truth is that the reaction is not meant for the present moment. It is meant for something much older, a fragment of emotion that was never put down. Every unresolved feeling is like a piece of amber stuck in the resin of memory. It keeps its shape, its sharpness, its sensation, and waits for a similar situation to come alive again. There is nothing condemning in this. It is simply how awareness functions. What has not been released will repeat its form so you can see it once more. What has not been brought to light will find a way to knock on the door of your heart, asking to be opened. So it is not emotion that harms you. It is the accumulation of emotion that exhausts you, and accumulation happens only when you forget that emotions are not meant to be fought or avoided, but to be heard. When I was young, I thought I had to eliminate negative emotions to be strong. But the older I became, the more I understood that forcing emotions away only strengthens them. Emotion is not defeated by willpower. Emotion dissolves through understanding, not an analytical understanding, but the recognition that what you are feeling is the echo of something from before. Once in Portland, a man told me that whenever someone disagreed with him, he felt panic as if he were about to be abandoned. He believed the problem was the person in front of him, but when I asked him to remember the first time he felt that way, he was silent for a long time, and then said that when he was a child, his father would leave whenever he disobeyed. I told him that his emotion today was not the truth of the present, but the shadow of an old memory, and when that memory is illuminated, the emotion naturally softens. He did not need to fight his fear of being left. He only needed to see that it does not belong to this moment. It is old. Only the mind has not realized it. An old emotion, when not understood, seeks to survive by repeating itself in new forms. It has no malice. It is only trying to come home so it can dissolve. A young woman in Seattle once told me that no matter whom she loved, she always feared they would one day leave her. I asked whether this fear truly came from the man she was with or from another figure in her past. She cried and said that when she was a child, her mother often left her alone for hours. The fear was not born today. Today only activated it. When I said this, she exhaled as if she had been carrying a bag of stones she did not know how to put down. I told her that an emotion not understood is like a door left slightly open. Any wind will make it shake, but when you close it with clarity, it no longer shakes, and what you hear instead is peace. This is what I want you to understand. Emotion is not the enemy. It is a signal that something inside you has been left unseen for too long. When you ignore it, it does not disappear. It comes back with more intensity, not to punish, but to be freed. Like a lost child in a crowded market, crying louder as night approaches, not to cause trouble, but to be found. Emotion works the same way. It does not come to weaken you. It comes seeking a path back to its original peace. And it needs only one thing from you, a non-judgmental awareness. When you pause and say in your inner quiet, "I am feeling this, and I am not abandoning it," the emotion changes shape at once. What used to be a wave becomes a drop. What used to be fear becomes a breath you can walk with. I have seen many lives change simply because they understood this one truth, that emotion does not need to be suppressed. It only needs to be named. When an emotion is named, it stops being a ghost. It becomes part of a story you now understand, and what is understood no longer binds you. What is seen clearly no longer repeats. What is held in clarity no longer needs to knock. A mature awareness is not one without emotion. It is one that sees emotion as a map, guiding you to places that have not yet been brought into light. And when those places are illuminated, the echoes of the past fade into a gentle silence, and in that silence you finally hear the true voice of your soul, a voice you may have forgotten you still carry. Many years ago, when I began exploring the nature of the mind, I discovered something that kept me silent for a very long time. We believe we are living in the flow of time, that today stands on the shoulders of yesterday and carries its shadow. Yet when I stepped into the inner world, when I listened to the movement of awareness in its depth, I realized that time is not as solid as we think. Time is only a structure the mind uses to organize experience, not an actual river passing through us. And if time is not a true river, then the past has no true power. I remember the first time I sensed this. I was sitting alone in a small room, the warm yellow light softening everything, when suddenly I felt a strange moment in which there was no forward or backward inside me. There was only a single point of presence, so still that I could not name it, and I understood that this was the present, not the present, as people describe it, not the moment that just passed or is about to arrive, but the present of spirit where everything unfolds inside the absolute now. When you stand in the ordinary flow of mind, you see the past behind you and the future in front of you. But when you stand in the flow of spirit, you see only one thing: everything is now. This is not a philosophy. It is simply how the deepest layer of human nature functions. The past does not exist as a living entity. It exists only as an image held in awareness. If you stop holding it, there is no place for it to remain, and so the only power the past has is the grip you maintain on it. I once told a man who was drowning in the pain of his childhood that the past has no door through which to return. It does not step out of the dark to attack you. You call it back each time you believe it still has force in your life. He looked at me for a long time, as if I had said something impossible. Then he exhaled and whispered that if this was true, he had spent his entire life inside a painful illusion. I told him that nothing is more painful than living inside an illusion while believing it is truth, and nothing is more freeing than realizing that the illusion dissolves the moment you see its nature. When we imagine time as a river, we believe the past has drifted away, but still pulls us down with its weight. Yet when we understand that time is only a story the mind uses, we see that the past has not drifted anywhere. It is only an old sentence, repeated an old image, replayed an old film, turned on again, simply because we have not turned off the projector inside. No force in the universe keeps you in yesterday. Only unseen thinking keeps you there through habit. A woman once asked me that if the past is not real, why she still feels its pain. I told her that the pain is not proof of the past being real. It is proof that she is still keeping the memory alive. Each time we replay the image, each time we attach the old meaning, each time we say, "This is who I am," we breathe life into something that should have dissolved long ago. The past does not exist as a fixed point. It exists as the repetition of memory, and memory survives only through attention. I have seen people transform their lives through a single shift in perception. They stopped believing that the past has the right to define them. When they released that belief, they did not only walk out of the shadow of the old years. They stepped into their own light naturally, as if they had been meant to do so long ago. Spirit does not know past. Spirit knows only presence. Spirit does not record mistakes. Spirit knows only wholeness. Spirit does not uphold time. Spirit upholds essence. And this is why, when you stand in true presence, the pain of the past weakens instantly, not because you force it down, but because you are no longer standing where it can reach you. When you stand in the present of the mind, you live as an old version of yourself. When you stand in the present of spirit, you live as your true being, and in that place the past cannot enter. I want you to imagine this. If you stand on a high mountain, you can look down and see the road you walked, but the road cannot climb the mountain to pull you back down. Only you can leave the mountain to return to where it lies. The past is the same. It cannot climb to find you. You simply lose your place in presence and return to where it still stands, and what pulls you back is not memory itself, but the belief that memory still has power. When you release that belief, you return to the mountain. You return to the place where spirit waits for you, and you see what I saw many years ago. The past does not need to be defeated. It only needs to be seen for what it is. Once you see it as an illusion created by time, it dissolves like mist when the sun rises. There are mornings when I wake very early while the sky is still as quiet as a sheet of paper, not yet written on. In that moment, I feel clearly that the present is not a passing instant, but the invisible foundation of all life. It is not the midpoint between past and future, but the place where everything truly happens. And the deeper I go into the spiritual life, the more I know that only in the present can transformation open. The past has already taken its shape. The future has no shape yet. Only the present is alive and flexible, the only material awareness can touch to change itself. I once spoke with a young woman who felt trapped by her past. She said she wanted to change, but each time she looked back, she felt pulled backward. I told her that no one changes by looking into the past. We change only by standing firmly in the present where awareness can choose again. I told her that healing does not happen when you pull old stories back to fix them, but when you withdraw attention from them and place it in now. Now is the only open door. All other doors are only walls. When she understood this, she said she had never thought of the present as a place of power. I told her that the present is not only powerful, it is the only source of power a person can ever touch. Any real change in the soul begins when you return to I am, the pure being of presence. I am is the voice without form, not tied to any story you tell, not attached to any role you carry. It does not say, I am someone who failed, or I am someone who was hurt. It simply says, I am. I am is the deepest affirmation spirit has ever known. It holds no time and no definition. It is complete presence. When you stand in I am, you no longer see life through memory, but through essence, and when you see through essence, every wound becomes transparent like glass under sunlight. In that transparency, the past is no longer a heavy darkness, but a faded image without force. I once sat meditating in a small room in Boston, with my hand over my chest, whispering I am. Nothing added. No name, no adjective, no content, only I am. And in those minutes I felt clearly that I was not the person of yesterday or the person of tomorrow. I was what is present. And standing in that full presence, every memory that had shaken me felt distant, as if it had happened in a dream from which I had just awakened. The clarity of the present is so strong that it makes every illusion fall away. A man once told me he could not escape the regret of something he had done when he was young. I asked him whether he could change that event in this moment. He said no. Then I asked whether he could change himself in this moment. He said yes. I told him that his freedom lay in the second answer. The past binds you only when you carry its spirit into the present. But if the present is cleansed, if it is seen through the presence of I am, the past has no ground left to stand on. It is like darkness when the sun rises. Darkness does not need to be removed. You do not need to chase it. You only need to stand where the light is. The light takes care of the rest. The present is not a small slice of time squeezed between two walls of past and future. The present is the boundless spiritual space where all possibilities are ready to appear, and when you step into the present with awareness, you step into a freedom nothing from the past can follow. I once met a young woman whose childhood fear returned every time she began something new. Each time she tried to move forward, she felt the old disappointment of her parents echo through her. I told her that the memory does not come back. Only awareness goes back to the memory because it forgets where it is standing. I taught her to place her hand on her heart and say softly, I am here. I am in now. I am this presence. A few weeks later, she told me she had never known peace could come so quickly, not because the past changed, but because she stood firmly in the present for the first time. People often think healing requires going backward to find the cause, but that is true only in a very small sense. True healing happens when you return to the only place you can change the present, and what changes is not the story, but the one who is looking at the story. An awareness standing in IAM is no longer pulled by old wounds. It stands like a mountain in the clouds. Winds can pass, but the mountain does not move. In the same way, emotions may visit and memories may echo, but you no longer lose your center. Finally, I understood that presence is not a technique. It is home, and each time you return to that home, everything that is not your true nature falls away. And you see that you were never bound by the past. You were only momentarily absent from yourself. In the early years of my spiritual journey, I misunderstood prayer in many ways. I thought prayer was asking a request for God to change something in the world around me. But the quieter I became, and the more I listened to the movement inside, the clearer it became that prayer is not a plea for outer change, but an adjustment of inner perception. Prayer does not make the world different. It makes our eyes different. And when our eyes change, the whole world changes with them. I have seen many people pray for years while their pain remained because they were still standing in the same old point of perception. They still looked at memory with the same old gaze. They still placed the same old meaning on what had happened. They still told themselves the same stories their soul had wished to release long ago. When prayer comes from fear, it is only the repetition of the past. But when prayer comes from truth, it becomes corrective prayer, the kind of prayer that rearranges the mind like a chaotic book being restored to the right chapter and the right line. I remember a man who came to me with tired eyes as if he had carried a wound that would never close. He told me that for years he had asked God to make him forget a painful memory, yet the memory kept returning stronger and sharper. I told him the issue was not the memory. It was the way he was looking at it. Corrective prayer does not ask the memory to disappear. It asks the gaze to become brighter. When he looked at the memory with love instead of fear, it changed shape immediately. I taught him a simple method. Close your eyes and let the image come. Do not resist it. Do not accuse it, simply look at it as you would look at an old photograph. Then whisper silently, I see this with new light. I no longer hold the old meaning. I let truth shine on this image. At first he trembled because that memory was fire to him, but day by day he no longer saw it as a threat, but as something needing to be held in light. And one afternoon he told me that during his prayer, the memory had softened like a page, no longer sharp at the edges. What makes corrective prayer powerful is that it does not try to fix the world. It corrects direction. For the nature of pain does not lie in the event, but in the way we continue to see the event. Changing perception is not only changing thought. It is changing the level of awareness. It is lifting memory closer to the light of spirit, where everything once heavy becomes lighter. A woman once asked me how she would know when a prayer had been received. I told her that when a prayer opens your heart instead of closing it, when it makes you lighter instead of heavier, when it helps you see more clearly instead of more fearfully, then the prayer has touched truth. True prayer does not reach outward. It falls inward. And in that moment, your awareness shifts from someone who is begging to someone who is remembering their essence. Another important thing many do not realize is that corrective prayer does not require you to understand every memory. It only requires you to look without accusation. When you set down the words, "This is my fault," and replace them with the words, I look again to be healed. Your mind opens a new space, and in that space, the memory returns to its rightful place, the past. I once worked with a young man who said he could not forgive himself for something he had done as a child. I told him to close his eyes and let the memory come, then asked him to say one thing to his younger self: I see you. He cried immediately because for the first time, instead of condemning the old image, he embraced it with his presence. And that is corrective prayer at work. It brings light into what was dark. It brings truth into what was mistaken. It brings essence into what was suffering. I have learned that prayer never fails. Only we fail to change the angle from which we pray. When we shift that angle, prayer becomes alive. When we let light enter the memory becomes clear. When we stop repeating the old meaning, the soul becomes light. And when the soul becomes light, we know healing has begun. Before closing this part, I want to ask you something very quietly. In your life, is there a memory that you know is ready to be seen with new light? Just one memory. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for walking this journey with your beautiful heart. When I was young and first learning about the inner life, I believed the outer world operated by its own laws while the mind operated by another system. I did not know that the two were never separate. Only after enough experience did I realize a simple but powerful truth: life reflects consciousness. Not sometimes, but every moment. Whatever we hold within will find a way to appear outside in a matching form. And because of this, to change life, a person must change the inner cause. I remember the day I understood the law of reflection. I was walking on a rainy street in Manhattan when a strange feeling rose in me. I saw clearly that no event happens randomly. Every situation is a combination of circumstance and the level of awareness we are carrying. It felt as if a giant mirror was always standing before me, a mirror that did not reflect my face, but reflected the frequency of what I believed to be true about myself and life. When we believe we are rejected, we see rejection. When we believe we lack, we see lack. When we believe we are unworthy, we meet experiences that confirm it. Not because the world is against us, but because the mind is projecting an image that life simply answers. I began to see that most of what people experience does not come from the present, but from ideas crystallized in the past and stored in the subconscious. The subconscious does not know time. It does not distinguish between what happened and what is imagined again. It only responds to the images held in it with emotion. If you keep an old image in the subconscious, it will find a way to express itself outwardly in some form. A person who feels abandoned may not have been abandoned in many years, but the old belief still lives in the subconscious, causing them to create situations that make them feel left behind. A person who feels guilty about the past will unconsciously create experiences that make them think they must pay a price. Not because life wants to punish them, but because the subconscious cannot respond with anything other than the image it holds. When I understood this, I looked back on my earlier years and saw clearly that many things I thought were fate were really reflections of old beliefs. Nothing forced me to repeat anything. It was only me keeping those images alive without knowing it. And from that, I understood deeply that when we heal the old images in the subconscious, the outer world changes immediately. I once met a man who believed he was born to fail. There was no clear reason, but he carried that belief from childhood, when his father often said he could do nothing well. That belief lived in his subconscious, like a broken piece of mirror. No matter how he tried, his efforts were distorted by that mirror. When I told him that life was not opposing him, but that the image inside him was being reflected outward, he did not believe me. But months later he returned and said the greatest change did not come from outside, but from the moment he stopped repeating his father's words. He began speaking to himself with a different voice, and when the inner voice changed, the outer life changed with it. A woman I guided was haunted by betrayal from an old friend. The pain lived in her subconscious, like an unhealed wound. Even after many years, she remained guarded and her situations kept repeating the pattern of betrayal in some form. But when she learned to look at the old memory with new light, her subconscious began to change. She stopped sending out the frequency of fear. She stopped expecting hurt. She stopped imagining old scenarios in new roles. And one day she cried because she realized that for months nothing in her life had made her feel betrayed. Not because the world had changed its nature, but because her heart had changed its rhythm. That is the miraculous effect of healing the past. When the image in the subconscious is renewed, the reflection in life is renewed. This law has no bias. It does not choose whom to favor. It simply operates. The image held long will reflect long. The image released will stop reflecting. I once asked a student, if you look in the mirror and see dust on your face, do you break the mirror or clean your face? The answer is obvious. Yet in life, people often blame the world instead of cleaning the old images in their subconscious. The more they try to fix the outside, the more tangled it becomes. The more they look within, the freer they become. And when we dare to place the hand of awareness on the dark corners of the mind and say, I release this image, I no longer need it to explain my life, the law of reflection moves instantly. Life begins to return new images, new experiences, new people, not as magic, but as the natural result of an inner cause being cleansed. I believe each person has the ability to change their reflection, not by trying to change every situation, but by healing the cause within. When the cause changes, the effect changes. When the image changes, life changes. And when consciousness changes, the future changes with it. There are moments in life when I feel as if I am standing before an old door, a door I should have closed long ago, yet still keeps slightly open. Not because I want to return, but because a part of me still believes I owe something to the past. And I know you have stood there too, looking at stories that have expired yet not knowing how to set them down. Humans have a strange habit. They carry cycles that have ended as if they still have unfinished tasks. A relationship that has passed, but the memory still holds tight. An old mistake, but the guilt has not left. An event that no longer affects the present, but is still repeated like a sentence. I once thought that to close a cycle we had to understand every reason why it happened. But the deeper I went, the more I saw that an ending does not depend on understanding everything. It depends on accepting that the cycle has completed its role. A cycle ends when we no longer need it to explain who we are. Once during a small gathering in Colorado, a woman came to me and said she could not let go of an old chapter of her life. She feared that if she let go, she would lose a part of herself. I looked at her for a long moment and said, "You lose nothing. You are only placing the past back where it belongs. You keep only what needs to be kept, the wisdom it left behind. The rest you must let go. If not, it becomes an invisible string tying you to what has already died. And humans are not meant to live in what has died." I realized that to close a cycle, you do not fight it. You bless it. Because blessing is the most powerful spiritual act of release. When you bless, you do not deny the pain, but you also do not make it your identity. You say, I see you, I understand the role you played, I learned from you, and now I let you go. Blessing is the art of cleansing the energetic field of memory. It is like placing a hand on an old wound and saying thank you, but I no longer need you to live. I have seen many lives change simply because they knew how to close with blessing instead of anger. A man once told me that his old relationship caused him so much suffering he could not open his heart to anyone else. He thought he needed a final explanation, an apology, a clear understanding of what happened. But I told him that some doors close only through blessing. You bless not because the other person deserves it, but because your soul deserves freedom. You bless not to accept their behavior, but to end its influence on you. You bless not to change them, but to change yourself. I taught him a simple sentence that I had repeated in my heart for many years. I bless you. I place you in the light. I release you from my mind. I am free, and so are you. At first he did not believe such a sentence could do anything. But weeks later he returned with gentler eyes. He told me he was no longer angry, not because he forgot the past, but because he no longer carried it like a stone in his heart. That is the power of blessing. It does not change the past. It changes you. And once you change, the cycle closes on its own. I once believed endings had to come from unfinished conversations, unspoken truths, unresolved questions. But life taught me that some endings require no words. They require maturity. You do not need permission from anyone to close your own cycle. You do not need them to apologize. You do not need them to understand. You only need to know you are ready to walk through a new door. And when your heart is ready, the old door closes without a sound. I once wrote in my journal that a cycle ends when the heart no longer tightens when thinking of it. A cycle ends when we no longer use it to justify our fears. A cycle ends when we can look back and no longer wish to change what happened. A cycle ends when we can say it has completed its purpose in my life. And what tells me I have truly closed a cycle is a feeling light as breath, as light as setting down something I have carried too long, light enough to feel more space within me, light enough to know I have stepped one level deeper into freedom. If today you are carrying a door that has not yet closed, know that you do not need to fight it. You only need to bless it. And when you bless with sincerity, the past leaves you like a leaf falling from a branch, not in anger, not in resistance, simply returning to the earth. Before closing this part, if there is a cycle in you that has reached its time to be laid down, comment I release, or simply the number 1, so I know you are stepping into this gentle journey with me. Thank you for being here with such a beautiful heart. When I was young, I used to think childhood was something left behind, a piece of land one could never return to, a film already finished with no way to be edited. But the deeper I stepped into the inner life, the more I understood that childhood is not behind us. It lives inside us, like an old breath, like a soft voice rising each time we feel fear or doubt. And sometimes those echoes make an adult feel much smaller than they truly are. I have met many people who appear strong on the outside, yet whenever something touches their hidden worry, you can almost hear the cry of a child who was never comforted. Because childhood is not about years. It is about the marks in memory that were never held with care. The child does not disappear. It waits for you to return. And only when you return to it can you return to yourself. I remember an early autumn morning in Boston when a young man named Michael came to see me. He was intelligent and determined, yet whenever he spoke about making decisions for his future, he trembled. I asked him what frightened him so much. He said that as a child his parents never believed he could do anything. Those words had now become the voice inside him. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew the one speaking to me was not a 28-year-old man, but an 8-year-old boy sitting in a corner telling himself he was not good enough. I placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "It is all right, that child is not wrong, but now is the time for you to lead him out of that corner, not with judgment, but with light." When I speak of light, I do not speak of mystery. I speak of truth. The truth that no child is ever at fault for believing what adults tell it. It does not yet have the ability to know what is real and what is someone else's fear. It only receives, and for that reason, childhood is never a sentence. It is only the first draft, and you have the right to rewrite it, not by erasing it, but by giving it a new meaning. When you return to the child within you, do not need to dig through every pain. You only need to be present. Your presence now is stronger than anything it ever experienced. Imagine you step into a quiet room where the child sits alone. It does not see you at first. It is too busy holding its fear. But then you gently kneel, place your hand on its back and say, "I am here. I have come for you." You do not need to explain the past. You only need to give it what it never received, the feeling of safety, the feeling of being understood, the feeling of being believed in. And something miraculous happens. When that child sees that you, the one it has become, are stronger, softer, and more generous than the people who once heard it, it begins to believe in itself again. The power of re-educating memory lies here. You do not fight the old pain. You change the one who is looking at the pain. When you change the one looking, the memory changes color. I once guided a single mother who had been through many storms in life. She said her childhood was filled with scolding, and it made her believe every mistake in adulthood was proof of her inadequacy. I asked her to close her eyes and meet herself at 5 years old. She saw a small girl standing in the corner of an old kitchen holding tightly onto her shirt. And for the first time in her life, she walked toward that girl, not with anger, but with a soft breath, and said, "You are not at fault. You are only a child. You deserve love. You do not have to endure alone." When she later described that moment, her shoulders softened, as if she had carried a heavy suitcase her entire life and finally put it down. Not because the memory disappeared, but because she changed her relationship with it. It is like an old room still there, but you open the window and light enters, and suddenly the whole room changes shape. The past cannot touch you when you look at it from a higher awareness. Every child inside us has only one wish: to be seen, to be heard, to be trusted. When you come back and give it, that you not only heal your childhood, you reclaim the freedom you should have had long ago. You become the person that child needed, and when you hold it in your arms, you are holding the deepest part of your soul. You are saying, "I will not abandon you again." That is the strongest promise an adult can make to their inner child. When you keep that promise, life begins to change, not from the outside, but from the center of who you are. And a person who changes from the center will change the world around them. Remember this: the child within you does not need a different past. It needs a different you. A you who knows that love is not a reward but a nature. A you who knows that silence is not weakness but the prayer of the soul. A you who knows that childhood is not a sentence but a doorway back to your original wholeness. And when you walk through that doorway, you do not only heal, you are reborn. There were seasons in my life when I thought I was seeing the world correctly. I believed that remembering the mistakes of others was a way to protect myself. I thought keeping their faults in my mind would help me avoid being hurt again. But the older I grew, and the deeper I walked into the inner path, the more I understood that it was not others imprisoning me, but the old images I insisted on holding that kept me locked in a stifling room. Judgment is not an outward act. It is a cut that turns inward. And we often do not realize this until the heart becomes tired from carrying what it was never meant to carry. I once held an image of an old friend for many years. He had disappointed me in an important moment, and I kept that moment as proof that he did not deserve my trust. Every time I thought of him, I felt myself shrink into caution. But what I did not notice was that the image of him I held was also the shadow I cast onto myself. When the mind becomes used to seeing others through their mistakes, it also starts to see oneself as a mistake. No judgment touches only the one judged. It always circles back to the one who sends it. And that was when I understood a simple but powerful truth. When you hold someone in their past, you also hold yourself in your past. One day, as I walked along the shore of Santa Barbara, a question drifted into my mind. Emmet, are you willing to let that person become new in your heart? The question seemed light, yet it made me stop walking. Because allowing someone to be new means stepping out of the safety of judgment. Judgment makes us feel right, but it does not make us whole. I sat on a rock, watching the waves break, and realized that every wave is free because it does not cling to its previous form. It does not hold what it just was. It allows itself to be new. And I understood that if I wanted to be free, I had to see others like those waves, always capable of renewal, always able to soften, always capable of becoming more beautiful than what I once saw. When we judge others, we are doing something the mind is very familiar with, freezing what is always changing. But people are not stone. They are flow. They are movement. They are souls, learning and growing. Sometimes they hurt us. Sometimes they disappoint us. But that does not turn them into a permanent sentence. It only turns them into humans, and humans have the right to grow. I remember teaching in a small group in Chicago when a middle-aged man stood up and said he could not forgive his younger brother. He said the brother had stolen money from the family and left. 20 years had passed, yet he still held that image as if it happened this morning. I asked him whether he was truly seeing his brother or only seeing his memory of him. He was silent for a long time, and then said he no longer knew. And that was the moment I saw clearly how the mind works. It does not hold people by time. It holds them by emotion. If the emotion is not healed, the memory remains like a photograph that never fades. But emotion does not reveal the nature of another person. It only reveals what we went through. I told him his brother is not the man of 20 years ago, and neither is he, but the image he is holding is from 20 years ago, and that is what keeps him standing in the pain. He sighed, and in that sigh, a door opened. Not the door of forgiveness, but the door of clarity. When you see this mechanism, you begin to understand that holding old images of others is placing them inside a box you have built, and each time you do that, you step into the box with them. Judgment makes you smaller. Understanding makes you wider. No one grows in a narrow room, not them, not you. I am not saying you must forget what others have done. I am saying, do not let those events become the mold that defines them forever. You can keep the lesson, but you must release the person. When you do this, you feel as if a long closed window has been opened. Light enters, air enters, and you realize you too have been released from your own judgment. The most surprising truth on the inner path is this: every time you allow another to be free, the part of you that was trapped becomes free as well. I have seen this happen countless times. When you stop keeping someone in their old story, your heart becomes lighter. Everyone has a chapter that has passed, and no one should be forced to live forever in a chapter simply because someone else is still rereading it. Let them move to the next chapter, and let yourself move to the next chapter. This is not an act of weakness. It is an act of a mature soul, and a mature soul knows that judgment is never the answer. Love is not always easy, but seeing others with new eyes is always the path that leads you back home to yourself. There are moments in life when I sit quietly and realize that much of human exhaustion does not come from what they are living, but from what they believe they are. Everyone carries a story, and the older they become, the more tightly they cling to that story, as if it were the only proof of their existence. I have seen many people evaluate themselves not by the truth of the present, but by the fragments of the past. They say, I am someone who has failed. I am someone who was not loved. I am someone who made mistakes. I am someone who missed opportunities. But these are only chapters, not the entire book. They are frames of a film, never the essence of the person who is still alive. I remember one afternoon in Philadelphia when a young woman came to me after a talk. She looked at me with eyes both determined and desperate. She said, Emmet, I no longer know who I am. I have been through so much hurt that every decision I make is based on fear. I think that is my personality. I looked into her eyes and said, no, that is not your personality. That is the response you learn to survive. And survival is never the true nature of the soul. I told her, you are not shaped by what has happened. You are only temporarily shaped by how you look at what has happened. And if the way of seeing changes, the self changes too. The strangest thing is that most people do not realize they have the right to separate themselves from their life story. They think the story is who they are. But essence does not depend on memory. Essence is the life operating within you, untouched by the past, unaffected by mistakes, unaltered by what others have said. As I went deeper into the spiritual path, I realized the soul is like the ocean beneath the waves. The ocean is still deep and unchanged. Only the waves our experiences move. But people mistake the waves for the entire ocean. They say, this is me. I am chaotic. I am weak. I am wounded. No, that is only the surface. Your truth lies in the depth where no wind can disturb. I remember a man once said he could never become better because his childhood was too painful. He carried it as proof that his path must remain difficult. I told him, childhood is not a chain. It is simply the background that helps you understand yourself better. Humans are not created to live in the background. They are created to live in essence. And essence is always new, always bright, always whole. The problem in life is not that we have a story, but that we forget we are not the story. Each time you say, I am unworthy, that is not truth. That is belief. Each time you say, I cannot change, that is not truth. That is a conclusion. The soul never concludes. The soul only expands. There were moments when I looked back at myself and realized I too had identified with my story. I thought my mistakes were a sentence. But when I stepped into a higher understanding, I saw that mistakes were only wrinkles on a mirror. They were not the true reflection. When the mirror is cleaned, the image becomes clear. And when the mind is renewed, the person becomes free. I met a woman named Laura. She said she had heard one sentence all her life: "You are not good enough." That sentence became the skeleton of her identity. She lived within that limit for more than 30 years. But when I asked Laura who said that sentence the first time, she replied, "My mother." And I said, "Then that means it was your mother's perception, not your truth. You have lived many years under a sentence that does not belong to you." She cried, but it was the cry of release. A person truly changes when they see they have been carrying an identity that is not theirs. When you drop the old identity, you do not become someone new. You return to who you have always been. Someone not defined by memory. Someone not bound by labels of the past. Someone not limited by what they once believed about themselves. In my deepest silence, I have often felt a whisper in my mind. You are not the story. You are the light behind the story. You are not the wound. You are the strength rising from the wound. And when you understand this, you will no longer fear the past, because it no longer holds the right to define you. I want to ask you something, and take a moment to answer it, honestly in your heart. Have you been living too long as a version shaped by the past instead of the version your soul knows is true? And if the answer is yes, are you willing to step out of the old story and return to your true essence? Thank you for listening with such an open heart. There are days when I sit in silence and look back at my life as if looking at a book with folded corners, and I realize that what exhausts people is not what they have lived, but the belief that they must go back and fix every page. They think that to have peace they must start life over, undo every mistake, revisit every decision. But the more I live, the more I understand that the path of the soul does not work that way. You are not called to return to the past. You are called to rise from it. One evening, as I was rereading a passage of scripture I had marked many years ago, my eyes stopped at the story of Lazarus. And what struck me was not the miracle of resurrection, but the words Jesus spoke afterward. "Unwrap him and let him go." I sat with that sentence for a long time because I understood that Lazarus could not step into his new life while still bound by the cloth of his old story. Only when those layers fell away did the resurrection become real. In my journey, I have met many souls living like Lazarus, standing upright, yet still wrapped tight in the bandages of their past. They have escaped the darkness, but have not stepped into the light because they still hold the cloth of old guilt, old labels, old fear. And they do not understand why new life has not come to them. But how can you walk when your feet are tied? How can you see light when your face is covered? Inner resurrection happens only when you release the need to fix what has happened and begin living from the present moment where your soul is truly opening its eyes. I remember a man telling me he had spent his entire life trying to correct a mistake he made when he was young. He said he wanted to prove he was no longer that person, but as he spoke, I heard the heaviness in his voice, as if he had been running too long on a road that led nowhere. I gently told him the past does not need to be repaired. It needs to be released. No one can build a new house on ground they keep digging up. To begin, you must sometimes stop touching the old soil. He looked at me confused, and I asked him, "Do you want freedom, or do you want to keep proving something to an old version of yourself that no longer exists?" When I asked that, he began to cry, not because the question was hard, but because he knew he had lived too long for a shadow. Resurrection begins when we say enough. Enough of the old story. Enough of the labels others placed on us. Enough of the versions we thought we had to be. When you let those layers fall, you do not lose anything. You simply reveal the true self that has always existed as the seed of light within your soul. Once a young woman in New York came to me saying she felt trapped in a loop of mistakes. Not because she was still doing wrong, but because she believed every step she took was shaped by what she had done before. I asked her to close her eyes and imagine standing in a dark room with a door slightly open and light shining through. I asked her what kept her from walking through that door. She was silent for a long time, then said, "I am afraid." I asked, "Afraid of what?" She said, "I am afraid I do not deserve what is in the next room." And that was when I understood that inner resurrection does not depend on the light, but on whether you believe you are worthy to step into it. I told her you do not need to be worthy. You only need to be willing. Light does not demand perfection. It only needs a soul brave enough to move forward. When she opened her eyes, I saw a small but real change in her gaze. New life always begins in a moment between two breaths, when you decide to no longer define yourself the old way. When I think of resurrection, I do not think of a grand event. I think of quiet changes. A morning when you wake and no longer repeat yesterday's failures to yourself. An afternoon when you make a small mistake and no longer judge yourself with the harsh voice of the past. A night when you look in the mirror and no longer see the person you used to criticize. Those moments are resurrection. Renewing the mind is what unties the bandages around the soul. Every time you refuse to believe the old story, a strip of cloth falls away. Every time you choose truth above fear, your face becomes a little more uncovered. Every time you rise with gentleness, you take one step out of your own tomb. I know there are parts of you that have died before your hope, your courage, your sense of worth. But they did not die completely. They are resting, waiting for a call. When you say to yourself, "I am ready to live again," that is the call. New life does not come from denying the past. It comes from stopping the habit of giving the past a power it no longer deserves. And when you do that, something miraculous happens. You do not only continue living, you come back to life. As I sit down to write these final lines, I feel as though I am looking back on a long path where each step was not only yours, but also mine, because every soul seeking its way back to peace walks through the same forest. The shadows may differ, the wounds may carry their own shapes, but the call that leads us back to truth is strangely the same, and it always whispers that you are not what you have lived. You are the light trying to return to itself. I have spent a lifetime observing the human mind, and I have seen this clearly. Every person carries two versions of themselves. One version, shaped by memory reaction, fear the psychological clothing that life has placed upon them. And another version, quieter but unbelievably strong, the self untouched by time, unchanged by mistakes, unharmed by sorrow. Every step we take on this journey is to return to that self. And to return, we must leave behind the old baggage, not because what happened was meaningless, but because it has completed its purpose. I once carried too many memories like stones in my pockets until one day I asked myself, why walk uphill with hands full of rocks when no one is asking me to keep them? And that was when I understood that letting go is not losing but growing. Many people have told me over the years that they cannot move forward because the past is too heavy. But the past is not heavy. Only the way we hold it is heavy. When we think we must fix what happened, when we believe we must pay every debt of old mistakes, when we think we must carry responsibility for events that no longer exist. But the soul does not work by that logic. It does not count days. It does not record faults. It only knows two things: what makes it expand and what makes it contract. Every time you choose truth over fear, you expand. Every time you look at a memory with light, Instead of darkness, you expand. Every time you say to yourself, I am no longer the person of yesterday, you step into new life. I used to think people changed through great moments, but the truth is the opposite. People change through small decisions repeated quietly. A morning when you no longer blame yourself. A noon when you choose forgiveness instead of defense. An evening when you place your hand on your heart and say, I will not harm myself anymore. That is transformation, and it is this transformation that opens the door to peace. Peace is not the absence of challenge. Peace is when challenge no longer defines you. Meaning does not come from finding every answer. Meaning comes when you know that even without every answer, you are still moving in the right direction. Guidance is not a map. Guidance is the inner sense that you are being led by something greater than yourself. Hope is not believing everything will become good immediately. Hope is believing that whatever happens, there is still light to take one more step. Healing is not erasing memories. Healing is when you look at those memories and know they no longer control your heart. I have seen many souls standing at the doorway of renewal, yet turning back because they think turning back is responsibility. But the greatest responsibility of the soul is not to remain loyal to the old story. It is to remain loyal to its truth. And that truth is that you are not the wound. You are not the mistake. You are not the first chapter of your life's book. You are the one who has the right to write the next chapter. I tell you this because there was a moment in my own life when I released every story about myself, not because I disliked them, but because I knew they no longer held the person I was becoming. One morning I stepped outside into a foggy dawn, stood still, and felt as if someone placed a hand on my shoulder and said, now you can live true. And perhaps that is the same message I want to give you now. You can live true. You no longer have to live as the person shaped by the past. You no longer have to live under the projections of others. You no longer have to live in fear of what once happened. You can live as the person your soul has always known, a free person, a bright person, a peaceful person. If there is one thing I hope you carry from this entire journey, it is this. Each morning you wake, you have the right to choose who steps out of the bed, the heavy old version or the new version being born in the moment you breathe. And if today you choose that new version, even just a little, that is resurrection, a quiet but real resurrection, a resurrection that opens an entirely new life. And I believe with all the silence in my heart that you are standing exactly at that threshold.